The world's two largest economies are duking it out, you might say, in a tariff war. And China landed the latest blow this morning by announcing new tariffs on American imports. Well, that has sent U.S. markets into a slide. Got to look at these numbers for yourself. This is the Dow Jones Industrial right now. As you can see, down by 584 points, more than 2%. China is responding to Donald Trump's latest round of tariff hikes, which he announced on Friday. U.S. tariffs on many imports from China rose up to 25%. They were at 10%. CBC's Ellen Morrow is on the story in Washington.
Well, Suhanna, China, as you said, has announced that it is raising tariffs of its own on $60 billion of U.S. goods, raising those tariffs to 20 or 25%. Now, $60 billion worth of American goods translates into around 5,000 products. So as you say, this is China retaliating for the action we saw from the U.S. last week, where the Americans raised tariffs on $200 billion of Chinese goods to 25%. Now, this is all happening while the two sides are still trying to work out a trade deal between the two countries. There were talks here in Washington last week on Thursday and Friday. Those talks obviously didn't prevent these tariff rises from happening. But after those talks, we heard from Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, who called them constructive. And there also was a positive sense from the Chinese side as well. Even still, though, we are seeing this tit-for-tat increase. But one very important detail to point out is that the U.S. tariff increases only apply to goods that left China after the deadline of midnight on Thursday going into Friday, and they only take effect once those goods actually come into the United States. That leaves a 2 to 4 week window for those goods to ship here, and these Chinese tariff increases don't take effect until June 1st. So we are seeing these retaliatory measures, but that does leave the two sides a small but an important window of time to hopefully work out a deal before these tariffs start having a really tangible effect for consumers on both sides.
And I know you're watching for further reaction. Anything from Donald Trump?
Well, President Trump has been tweeting about China throughout the weekend, and again this morning. We can show you one of the tweets he posted earlier. The president writing on his Twitter account, many tariffed companies will be leaving China for Vietnam and other such countries in Asia. There is no reason for the U.S. consumer to pay the tariffs, which take effect on China today. Now, there's a problem with that tweet because, as I said, the tariffs don't actually take effect until those goods reach the United States. But that is sort of symbolic of the messaging we're hearing from the president. He's trying to say these tariffs will not hurt American consumers and that they will essentially force China to make a deal, when the tariffs could have a really tangible impact for American consumers if there is no deal worked out before those goods reach the United States. Here's what economic advisor Larry Kudlow had to say about this over the weekend.
The president says it pays the tariffs. They may suffer consequences, but it's U.S. businesses and U.S. consumers who pay, correct?
Yes, to some extent. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Again, both sides will suffer on this.
Now, that is, again, a little bit different than what we're seeing from the president. He's saying that this will not hurt American consumers. But the tariff increases that could be felt for the American consumers on goods will include things like vehicle parts, leather materials, as I said, vehicle parts, TV, some video cameras. It's a wide range of goods that, again, could really impact American consumers. And this tit for tat on both sides really does put the pressure on them to come to some kind of agreement, Suhanna.
That is CBC's Ellen Morrow in Washington. China's retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. are the latest gut punch, you could say, to global financial markets. They have been reeling for a few days now as the world's two biggest economies lob fresh measures against each other. We've got Jeannie Lee watching all of those numbers. The markets opened, the markets sank. Where do they stand right now?
And they're sinking some more now, Suhanna. Even though we had to expect China to retaliate against these latest measures from the U.S., the actual news that it is happening makes it real. And so here's a look at the big board at the NYSE. The Dow Jones Index did sink about 550 points at the start, did try to recover a bit, but in the last half hour crumbled below certain levels so that it was down more than 600 points and pretty close to being down 600 at the moment. Now, the two biggest drags are Apple, down about 6%. Boeing, also down a lot. Both those companies, examples of a lot of the U.S. companies that depend heavily on the Chinese market for revenues. In fact, several companies have blamed these long, unresolved talks for creating enough uncertainty to have their consumers and customers hold off on orders, and that is where slowdown starts to happen. So it's being felt around the world. We'll take a quick look at some of the other markets where we're seeing evidence of this anxiety. The NASDAQ market in the U.S., a lot of those tech stocks trade there, and a lot of those tech stocks do depend heavily on China. S&P 500, the broad measure of the U.S. market, down 3%, more than 3%. So that is a significant one-day drop. Here at home, the TSX Composite, it's down less than the other markets, but that's because our market is heavily made up of resource shares, but still, that is a 1% decline that we're looking at home. And the anxiety over a global slowdown has gripped markets in Europe and in Asia as well. As you see there, the DAX index in Frankfurt off by more than about 1.5%, and the London FTSE index off as well. And the Shanghai Composite, before all of this was starting to heat up overnight, we saw it down already about 1%. So you can imagine when that market opens again.
Thank you, Jeannie.
You're welcome.